Coming up, we explore the vast and expansive transportation system at Walt Disney World. Disney presents
Beyond the Kingdoms. Today's episode of Beyond the Kingdoms is proudly sponsored by SmallWorldVacations.com, authorized Disney vacation planners. Their team of knowledgeable agents have been creating the magic for over 20 years, and they can book your next trip to Walt Disney World. Just visit their website to get a free quote. Small World Vacations, where the magic begins. Hello everyone, it's David here from Beyond the Kingdoms, and I'm back today with another Sunday main show, giving you the best tips and tricks to know while visiting Walt Disney World. Today I'm going to be covering Disney's complex transportation system, how it works, the best way to get from one point to another, and how to best utilize each and every system. If you're new to this channel, welcome, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below so that you never miss an episode. But I've got a lot to cover today, so let's not waste any more time and jump right in. In today's episode, I'm going to break down each of the 5 major modes of transportation offered at Walt Disney World. To be clear, I'm not going to be talking about transportation-inspired attractions such as the Walt Disney World Railroad. This is a practical episode, explaining how guests traveling without a car can get around the resort with ease. And first up, we're going to talk about Disney's newest form of transportation, the Disney Skyliner. Now, I must admit, the Skyliner has seen some pretty big setbacks since opening a few weeks ago, but I'll get into more of that next week in my October news update video. Today, I'm just going to be giving you the key facts, where the system travels to, and a few tips to know before you board the gondolas. The Disney Skyliner opened just a few weeks ago on September 29, 2019. The manufacturer of the system is the same company that developed the Emirates airline that travels over the Thames River in London. Now, to understand all of the different route options of the Skyliner, we're going to start at Disney's Caribbean Beach Resort, because this is the central hub station. From here, guests can travel on 3 different lines. There's one that goes directly to the front entrance of Disney's Hollywood Studios, a second that goes to Disney's Art of Animation Resort and Pop Century, and then a third line that travels to Epcot. This one's a little bit different in that it passes through the Riviera Resort on the way. So this means depending on where you start and where you're going will determine if you have to transfer or not. For example, if you're starting at Pop Century and want to get all the way to Epcot, you'll take the first line from Pop Century to Disney's Caribbean Beach Resort, and then get on the second line that goes through the Riviera and then finally to Epcot. It's important to know that right now, the Riviera Resort is a little bit tricky because guests have the option to just stay on the gondola and keep going to Epcot or just get off. Unlike at Caribbean Beach, where everyone will have to disembark and then board another line. So keep that in mind when you're trying to factor in your travel time. Each gondola can hold up to 10 guests, and that all depends on your travel party and if you're using things like a stroller. In fact, those using a stroller, wheelchair, or even an ECV can remain in those vehicles and board the Skyliner. The only limitation is that double strollers have to be folded up before you board. The gondolas themselves can travel anywhere between 30 and 50 feet up in the air, so I have a little bit of a word of warning. If you're scared of heights, this might be an intimidating system to travel on. If traveling inside a large glass box on a wire 30 feet in the air is scary for you, I would suggest using one of the buses. Now, some people have expressed concern over how comfortable it is to ride the Skyliner because of the fact that the gondolas don't have an air conditioning system. I did manage to ride this on the opening day of the system, and I can say that whether you're riding at night or in the middle of the day when it's really hot, the overhead window ventilation system is pretty good, and the ride time between places are so short that you won't think much about it. However, if you get stuck on the system for some reason in the middle of the day, it can get really hot in one of these things. So to be honest, I have mixed feelings about this whole new system. If you're scared of heights or worried about getting stuck on the Skyliner for an extended period of time, I don't think this would be the mode of transportation for you. However, I must admit that it's the most relaxing way to get back to your hotel from the theme parks. The fact that there's only 10 people in a gondola keeps things really nice and quiet, and the views are pretty spectacular. In terms of operating hours, the Skyliner has seen a different schedule since opening a few weeks ago. So in this case, it's best to ask a cast member when the gondolas start running and when they stop at the end of the night. Generally speaking, you can pretty much bank that they'll start about an hour before opening time of the theme park and a good hour after the parks have closed. Let's now talk about the most iconic mode of transportation, the monorail. This has always been my favorite mode of transportation at Disney. The Walt Disney World monorail travels between 3 resort hotels and connects guests to 2 theme parks, the Magic Kingdom, of course, and Epcot. Let's take a deeper look at how the monorail works. The Walt Disney World monorail system opened on October 1st, 1971, along with the Magic Kingdom, the Polynesian, and Contemporary Resort. The trains used now here in Florida are the Mark IV monorail trains, built a few generations after the original over in Disneyland. Ours have always been much bigger than the California counterparts. There are 3 different lines of the monorail system and connect guests to 3 different resort hotels and 2 theme parks. Now, to understand the routes on the Disney World monorail, we have to start at the Ticket and Transportation Center, because it's from here where guests can board all 3 lines of the system. First, we have the Resort Monorail line. This one makes the most number of stops and works clockwise around Seven Seas Lagoon. If you're starting at the Ticket and Transportation Center, your next stop will be the Polynesian, followed by Grand Floridian, then Magic Kingdom, Contemporary, and back to the TTC. Next, we have the Magic Kingdom Express line. This is the one that you're going to use if you're traveling to the theme park in your own car. You'll park at the Ticket and Transportation Center and then board a monorail directly to the front entrance of the park. And at the end of the night, you'll just loop back to the TTC. It's important to note that this line will not make any stops at the hotel. They'll just pass right on through those stations. So if you're traveling to Magic Kingdom and hopping to a hotel for a meal, you're going to have to use the Resort Monorail line. And lastly, we have the Epcot line. This one travels directly from the Ticket and Transportation Center to the front entrance of Epcot and loop right on back at the end of the night. The good news is that all types of people can ride the monorail. Kids can stay in their stroller even if it's a double one, and guests using wheelchairs and ECVs can remain in those vehicles comfortably inside the monorail cars. Now, in terms of operating hours, the monorail will usually start 30 minutes prior to the park that opens first. Usually that's the Magic Kingdom, and run for a good hour after the last closing time. This means that technically, if the Magic Kingdom is opening at 8 a.m., the entire system will start at 7:30. And if Epcot closes at 9 and yet the Magic Kingdom closes at 10, the monorail will keep going until 11 p.m. So technically, if you parked your car at one theme park and you're hopping between the 2, you should still easily be able to get back to your car at the end of the night. The best thing to do in this case is to ask a cast member at the start of your day when the monorails will stop at the end of the night. But don't worry, Disney will always make sure there's a way to get back to your car. Now, if flying hundreds of feet in the air is simply too intimidating for you, consider a more relaxing way to arrive at the theme parks, aboard one of the many different water taxis. You may be surprised to know that you can get to over a dozen places at Disney World by traveling on a boat. For example, you've got obvious things like the giant ferry boats traveling to the Magic Kingdom. But guests staying at Saratoga Springs, for example, can board a boat directly to the heart of Disney Springs, and even travel to 3 more resort hotels. So let's take a look at the many routes across Walt Disney World that glide across the water. In terms of the routes of the water taxis, there's a lot of different ways to get around, so stick with me on this one. Let's once again start in the Magic Kingdom resort area. Between Seven Seas Lagoon and Bay Lake, there's actually 5 different routes for boats. Let's start with Seven Seas Lagoon. Like the Express monorail, you can also get an express ferry boat from the Ticket and Transportation Center to the Magic Kingdom, and then back again at the end of the night. There's also a water taxi route that travels from the front entrance of Magic Kingdom to the Grand Floridian, Polynesian, and back to the theme park again. This one's great for those of you staying at those 2 specific hotels. From the front entrance of Magic Kingdom, guests can also take a direct boat to Disney's Wilderness Lodge, and a separate boat line that will run from the Magic Kingdom to Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground. So technically these are starting in Seven Seas Lagoon and crossing over to Bay Lake, which takes us to our final water taxi route in this area. From Disney's Contemporary Resort, there's a water taxi that travels to Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground, followed by Wilderness Lodge, and then back to the Contemporary. This one will come in handy if you're a guest staying at the Contemporary and hoping to get to the Hoop-de-Doo Review at the campgrounds. Now, in terms of accessibility, those traveling in strollers and wheelchairs will have different rules depending on where they're starting and where they're traveling to. And that's because each of the boats used in these routes are very different. If you're using the ferry boat from the TTC to the Magic Kingdom, this one is very easy. Everyone can stay in their strollers, wheelchairs, and ECVs. Smaller water taxi routes, like the one that goes between the Magic Kingdom, Grand Floridian, and Polynesian, will require strollers to be folded. And sadly, those guests using things like ECVs won't be able to board the boats because these are very small. You'll have to stick to the monorail. The same applies to the water taxi route between the Contemporary, Wilderness Lodge, and Fort Wilderness. And operating hours for all of these routes really depends on the park opening times at the Magic Kingdom. Usually these boats will start 30 minutes to an hour before park opening time and up to an hour after the park closes. Now, I know that area is really complicated, so let's next move to the Epcot Resort area, because this one is a lot simpler. Over at Crescent Lake, there's a water taxi route that will start at Epcot, and then travel to Disney's Boardwalk, cross over Crescent Lake to Disney's Yacht and Beach Club, move on over to the Swan and Dolphin, and end at Disney's Hollywood Studios, where the boat will basically turn around and do the same route in reverse. A few things to note here. If you're staying at the Beach Club, getting a water taxi to Epcot is pretty pointless. It's an easy walk to the backdoor entrance of the park. If you're starting your route at Disney's Hollywood Studios and getting to Disney's Boardwalk, it's actually a little bit quicker to walk from the Swan and Dolphin directly to your hotel. That all depends on the exact location of your room. And if waiting for a boat is simply too long for you, there's also a walkway from the boardwalk all the way to Disney's Hollywood Studios. If you're staying at any of these hotels, you can basically access this pathway pretty easily. The whole route itself from start to finish will take about 20 minutes in each direction. And the boats will arrive every 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the time of day you're traveling. Now, I really like these friendship boats because they're a little bit more comfortable than the boats over the Magic Kingdom area. Depending on how many guests have strollers, you might not have to fold it up. There's a section at the back of each boat where you can comfortably park a stroller. Technically, this area is reserved for those guests using wheelchairs and ECVs. So it all really depends on who's traveling at that exact moment when you're boarding. Now, in terms of operating hours, this one can get a little bit tricky. Like everything else, everything is based on the opening times of the theme parks. Here's a good example I can give you. If Hollywood Studios closes at 8 p.m., the last boat all the way back from Epcot to Hollywood Studios will usually stop at 9 p.m. If Epcot is open until 9, the boats will still run until 10 p.m. But keep in mind, they won't all go back to Disney's Hollywood Studios. Like I've said a dozen times already, the best thing to do is to ask a cast member on the day you're traveling when the boats will stop. And let's finally move on over to the third section of the resort that uses water taxis. This is technically the Disney Springs Resort area. Now, water taxis in this area can connect guests between 4 different resort hotels to 3 different stations at Disney Springs. This one can get complicated depending on where you start and stop, because there are 4 different flag routes in this area. Let's start with the red flag route. This one travels exclusively around the different docks at Disney Springs. Technically, this will start on the marketplace side, tucked away behind Rainforest Cafe. From here, the boat will then travel to the west side, and then make its final stop at the landing, which is right smack in the middle of Disney Springs. From here, it will go back to the marketplace area and just keep doing that loop counterclockwise. Also from this dock, guests can board the yellow route. This one will go from the marketplace area to both Port Orleans French Quarter and Riverside. So if you're staying at one of those hotels and having dinner on the west side of Disney Springs, you'll take a boat first to the marketplace where you'll transfer to a second boat. Next, we have the green and blue route, which both start at the landing. The green route will travel exclusively from this section to Old Key West Resort and back again, whereas the blue route will go from the landing to Saratoga Springs. Like with everything else, always double check with the cast member before you board where your boat is traveling to. In terms of accessibility, these boats are very similar to those friendship boats over by Epcot, where there are designated spaces for wheelchairs and strollers. However, given that these boats are a lot smaller, it's very likely that guests with a stroller will have to fold those up. In terms of operating hours, all of the water taxi routes will usually start at 10 a.m. The
The last boats from the hotels to Disney Springs will usually be at 11 p.m., and the last boats back to the hotels will be 11:30 p.m. Now, of course, Disney Springs has a lot of offerings that stays open past that time. So, if you're planning to have a late night at Disney Springs, you'll have to take a bus back to your hotel.
Now, it may seem a lot less glamorous than a highway in the sky or traveling in your own water taxi, but Disney World buses can actually get you to the highest number of destinations across the resort. I personally used to overlook the buses, but ever since the new character overlays and some big technological upgrades inside the buses, the system has improved dramatically. However, riding a Disney World bus can be a little bit more complicated than you might think. Where you start your journey, the time of day you choose to travel, and where you're trying to get to can determine a lot. So let's break this one down a little bit further.
Generally speaking, there are buses from all of the resort hotels to the 4 theme parks, the water parks, and Disney Springs. But there are 2 main exceptions here. All of the hotels on the Monorail line will not offer a bus to the Magic Kingdom. And that's because some of them are close enough for you to walk to the park. Case in point, the Contemporary Resort. And both the Grand Floridian and the Polynesian offer the monorail and the boats. To be clear, both Wilderness Lodge and Fort Wilderness will offer a bus to the Magic Kingdom. There's also a weird rule over in the Epcot Resort area. Since the Boardwalk, Yacht and Beach Club, and Swan and Dolphin all connect to Disney's Hollywood Studios and Epcot, again, there's no bus service to these 2 theme parks. And that's because resort guests can use the water taxis. But please keep in mind that if the weather's really bad and the boats are not running, or the monorail has broken down for some reason, Disney will offer a replacement bus to these theme parks from these hotels. The only case in which I think this is a little bit tricky is when you're staying at one of the Epcot Resort area hotels and wanting to start your day at the very front entrance to Epcot. Whether you're walking to the International Gateway or taking a boat, you'll have to then walk all the way to Spaceship Earth. To me, that's a little bit of a bummer, but these resort hotels do come in handy if you're visiting the park during Food and Wine, for example, because you got easy access to those booths right away. Now, the good news is if you're staying at one of the hotels that uses the Disney Skyliner, these hotels still offer buses to both Epcot and Hollywood Studios. So don't think that if you're staying at Art of Animation, you have to use the Skyliner to get to Epcot. But in these situations, things can get really handy because you can take a bus all the way to the front entrance of Epcot, start your day at Spaceship Earth, work your way through the back of the park, and then if you end at somewhere like the France Pavilion, take the Skyliner back to your hotel. It's actually a really time-efficient way of getting to and from places. Now, there are 2 more areas where buses can get a little bit more complicated. First being if you're staying at a moderate hotel. I'm going to use Disney's Coronado Springs as an example. The moderates are huge resorts, and they have more than 1 bus station. Coronado Springs, for example, has a bus stop right at the entrance to the Grand Destino Tower. But there's also additional bus stops around the big resort. So technically, if you're staying all the way at the back, you'll pick up a bus right by your room and make a few stops before leaving to the theme parks. But if you're having breakfast at El Centro, for example, you can pick up a bus at the front entrance to the hotel, and you'll go directly to the theme parks from there. So please know, if you're staying at a moderate hotel, you have to give yourself extra time to travel to and from the theme parks. The final case where buses can get a little bit complicated is if you're traveling to one of the water parks. Bus transportation to both Blizzard Beach and Typhoon Lagoon will really vary depending on the time of day you're traveling and the time of year. In the quieter months of the year, it's very possible that a bus to Blizzard Beach will require you to make a transfer. In this case, you'll take a bus from your hotel to Disney's Animal Kingdom, where you'll switch to a Blizzard Beach bus. The same will happen at Typhoon Lagoon during the slower months. In this case, you'll take a bus to Disney Springs, where you'll transfer to Typhoon Lagoon. In these cases, I would say if you have a car, driving is a much better option. And of course, every resort hotel and the theme parks offers buses directly to Disney Springs. In terms of accessibility, all of those guests using ECVs and wheelchairs can board a bus comfortably. However, everyone using a stroller will have to fold those vehicles up. And in terms of hours of operation, the buses from the hotels to the theme parks will usually start 45 minutes to an hour before park opening time. And buses returning to all of the resort hotels will keep running until 2 hours after park closing time. So if you're staying at the Magic Kingdom well past closing time because you're shopping at the Emporium, don't worry. There's always plenty of time to get a bus back to your hotel.
Up until now, I've talked about different modes of transportation at Disney World that are completely free. Whether you're a Disney World hotel guest or staying off property, you can use the monorails, boats, buses, and Disney Skyliner all in the same. However, there's one more mode of transportation that will cost you a little bit extra if you want to use it. Those adorable minivans. Now, this can either be a big time saver or a complete waste of money. It all depends on how you use it. So let's take a look at some of the best and worst ways to use the Disney minivans.
Disney started testing out minivans back in 2017. Originally, it was only open for guests staying at a Disney World hotel, but now everybody can use Disney minivans, whether you're staying on property or not. The trick is your start point and end point have to be within the Disney property. So it's not like you can get a minivan from Universal Studios, let's say, all the way to the Magic Kingdom. That's a whole nother ballgame for another day. The minivan fleet is comprised of the Chevy Traverse. These crossovers can seat up to 6 guests, and they come equipped with 2 car seats. Now, if you're using something like an ECV or wheelchair, there are minivans out there that will accommodate these guests. And to request a minivan, guests will have to download the Lyft app, because it's from there where you can request this specific vehicle. The price you pay to use a minivan will completely be based off of the distance you're traveling. I'm going to use the example of requesting a minivan from Disney Springs to the front entrance of Epcot. You'll see that when you open the Lyft app and request a ride to this destination, a standard Lyft for 4 people will probably cost you about $12. If you need a little bit more space, you can get extra seats in the Lyft XL. This one will cost usually around $15. Keep swiping to the right and you'll notice the minivan option, which is priced at nearly $30. That's double the price. Now, Disney says the reason you're paying a little bit extra to use a minivan is because you're going to get a cast member who's knowledgeable about the property. So if you've got some questions about anything in Walt Disney World, these drivers are trained to know the answer. I personally don't find this very cost effective because I'm usually only traveling in a group of 2 or 4. It's not like I usually need 6 people. There are only 2 occasions when using a minivan will become useful. The first is if you've got little ones who need a car seat. Currently, both Lyft and Uber only offer the extra service of requesting a car seat in select cities. Only way to get a car seat in one of these rideshare services is by getting a minivan on the Lyft app. That extra cost you're paying is really for that service, in my opinion. The only other time where using a minivan can become really helpful is if you're traveling to the Magic Kingdom. And that's because a regular Lyft or Uber will only be allowed to drop you off at the Ticket and Transportation Center, while you'll have to get the monorail to get to the theme park. If you want to be dropped off right at the front entrance of the Magic Kingdom at the bus loop, a minivan is going to be your only option. Again, I think it's a little expensive for that, but if you're in a real big hurry and you need to get somewhere fast, it can come in handy. So overall, the minivans is a mixed bag. If you're just a couple traveling without children, I would say stick to the regular Lyft and Uber options. Only go for those minivans if you need those car seats. And if using a bus or monorail or boat is just too complicated or you've not got enough time.
So there you have it, folks, a complete deep dive into the complex transportation system at Walt Disney World. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you today. So if you've got some questions on today's topic, feel free to write them in the comment section down below. I'll do my absolute best to answer as many of your questions as I can.
And before I leave you guys today, I just want to give a quick shout out and say thank you to Small World Vacations for sponsoring this week's video. And make sure you tune in next week for a special October news update. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you can dream it, you can do it.